There is a moment in every human life when the question of meaning stops being abstract and becomes urgent. Viktor Frankl believed that moment arrives, almost without exception, during adolescence. It is not simply that teenagers are emotional or impulsive. It is that, for the first time, they are old enough to ask why, with full force, and young enough to have received almost no tools to answer it. Frankl wrote in The Will to Meaning that the existential vacuum, that pervasive sense of inner emptiness, tends to manifest most visibly at two moments: Sunday afternoons in adults who have exhausted their distractions, and adolescence, when the scaffolding of childhood identity collapses before a new one has been built. What looks like rebellion, boredom, or apathy is often something more precise: an existential crisis wearing the costume of teenage behavior. Consider the data. Rates of adolescent depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation have risen sharply over the past 2 decades, not despite material prosperity, but alongside it. Frankl would not have been surprised. He argued that meaning cannot be manufactured by comfort. A generation raised with more entertainment, more connectivity, and more psychological awareness than any before it is also reporting record levels of purposelessness. This is exactly what his theory predicts. The rebellion without a cause that James Dean made iconic in the 1950s was, for Frankl, a diagnostic sign. When a young person cannot articulate what they are rebelling for, only what they are rebelling against, they are expressing existential frustration. The energy is real. The direction is missing. Modern schools are particularly ill-equipped for this. Education systems are extraordinarily good at transmitting information and preparing students for economic productivity. They are almost entirely silent on the question of meaning. A student can graduate knowing calculus, the causes of the First World War, and the anatomy of a cell, and have no idea why any of it matters, or why they themselves matter. Frankl observed that this silence is not neutral. When the question of meaning goes unaddressed, the vacuum fills with substitutes: peer validation, social media performance, substances, or ideological extremism that offers a ready-made sense of purpose at the cost of authentic selfhood. What can adults do? Frankl was precise about this, and his answer is counterintuitive. Adults cannot give meaning to young people. Any attempt to do so will fail, and may backfire. What adults can do is serve as witnesses of meaning, people who demonstrate through their own lives that meaning is real, attainable, and worth pursuing. A parent who lives with visible purpose, who speaks honestly about what they find meaningful and why, does more for an adolescent's existential health than any lecture or therapeutic intervention. The teacher who is genuinely curious about the subject they teach, who does not pretend that all knowledge is equally important, who allows their own sense of wonder to be visible, that teacher is practicing what Frankl would recognize as existential modeling. There is also the question of suffering. Adolescence involves real pain, social rejection, identity confusion, the first encounters with death and loss. Contemporary culture tends to treat adolescent suffering as a problem to be managed, medicated, or optimized away. Frankl's framework suggests the opposite: that suffering, when met with the right orientation, is one of the most powerful sources of meaning available to a young person. The student who fails an exam and learns something essential about resilience, the teenager who loses a friendship and discovers what they genuinely value in a person, these are not just setbacks. They are, potentially, existential turning points. The challenge is that this reframing requires adults who have done the same work themselves. You cannot guide a young person toward meaning if you are yourself living in the existential vacuum. Frankl closed many of his lectures with a warning that has only grown more relevant. The mental health crisis of youth is not primarily a psychiatric crisis. It is a crisis of meaning, and it will not yield to techniques alone. It requires a cultural shift toward taking the question of purpose seriously at every level of education and family life. The most protective thing an adult can offer an adolescent is not safety from difficulty, but a living demonstration that difficulty can be meaningful. Subscribe to The Psychology of Viktor Frankl to explore more of his timeless ideas.